how do we start to unravel these things? What are the, what are 3 or 4 of the different, best practices that people can be thinking about? I think you've already hit on one of them, and that's, the biggest one, right, is just being open to communicating, right? Mm-hmm. And so why don't you, Pat, do you want to jump in from there?
Sure. We've talked a lot about what to communicate, and one of the things that that I really like as a strategy is the idea of agreeing together on a dashboard of information that will be shared. And again, it varies with the business, but essentially, if you, the first best practice is to make the commitment to communicate. And the way in which you operationalize that is to have some discussions around what are the key variables. And that can be put into, dashboard is my word, but, that can be put into a routine reporting structure that, again, is understandable to everyone who's involved. So really working through drafts of that and making sure that, is this the information? Is there anything else? What would be more helpful, so that you're then routinely communicating that. If you think about the role of communication, it's first and foremost to build trust, and then create with that foundation of trust, to create alignment. So how do you create trust and alignment? You do that with shared information that you receive consistently, and that is understandable and meaningful in some way. So I think that's the communication is the best practice. Something like a dashboard is the tool.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, Pat. And I think having, when you have those family meetings, thinking about the non-family managers in the business too, and having them do some of the presenting, right? First of all, it takes away some of that family dynamic right away, but it's a great opportunity for to sort of neutralize the Q&A portion of it, right? And be able to. It's also a good reminder to non-managing, shareholders that there are other employees who are non-family members who are actually shouldering key leadership responsibilities of business, and it's an opportunity to see why they have those roles, right, in terms of their experience and backgrounds, their expertise. I think one of the others is, I loved, Michael, when you talked about that young family member saying, who does this? This looks so neat, because that is one of the best practices Pat and I sort of think about too. It's how do you bring family members closer to sort of the key work sites of your business, to see the people who work in the business, what the distribution channel might look like at every step, what the end user looks like, if it's a real estate business, what the different properties look like. And so I've seen some families really make progress in exciting everyone around this important legacy, right, that's being managed, by really creating more of a multimedia approach to sharing information with families. And I say multimedia because it's really important to Pat's comment about educational styles and how we take in communication, to not just focus on reports and numbers for family members, right? We live in a visual world. If you're thinking about next generations, they've grown up with social media, they've grown up with their lives online, they now have distance learning, which has been reinforced this last year. So really think about, how do they learn best? And so I think that multimedia, lots of focus on visuals, around every part of the business. And don't forget to put in pictures of people. I think that's a really, really important one. The other is to give people that opportunity to think about things like internships. A lot of families have not really explored the concept of internships for family members in their business. And I think it's understandable why. It takes a lot of work to put an internship program together. But there's such an opportunity if you want to, first of all, if you want to engage and inspire your shareholders, what better way than to give them an opportunity to come and sort of get a taste of what the day in the life, right? What it's work in this. The other is, if you do, many family businesses say we do want to find that next generation of talent and leadership. And there may be one or two people that really, they have a passion and interest, they want to do the work. Let them have that opportunity to see what it actually looks like. Can be eye-opening for people to see what that looks like. And I think the other thing I would just say about internships is people always ask me, should they be paid or non-paid? And I'm just going to say right now, if you want to interest family members, especially young people, let's say high school, college, to come and work in your business during their only time off, you better think about how to pay them. And I've seen a lot of families have very different polarized opinions around whether or not it should be a rite of passage and people should be honored to be asked to work in the internship, versus just the reality that you're competing with the demands of other people, other people's times. And so a realistic sort of, sponsorship of those internships is important.
That's great.
I would add one more thing on the education piece, which is that, a number of families choose to, when they have their periodic gatherings, choose to do that at a work site location. So when you can actually visit and use the conference room of a facility that you own and is part of the business, then you get that direct hands-on experience as well. That's not always possible, but that's a lovely way to build that engagement.
Yeah. Go back to the story of the young girl this summer, and I'll share a couple other things that I think will be helpful in this conversation. Because again, it would get even stickier if they were shareholders. These were non-shareholders. They were just family members. And so it was really important to them as well. When they were setting up this meeting, it was the very first one that was ever done. The non-working family members that weren't part of any of these meetings were like, what is this all about? When the family business coach that I work with, was walking up to them at the park that where we were doing this, which was a work site that they owned and yada, yada, yada. It felt like death was walking across the field. People were like, who is this guy? I am not happy about this. Are we going to be singing Kumbaya? What is he planning? And so that setup is important. It's really important to make sure that letter goes out and the emails go out to prep everybody, and the communication is there to make these things happen. When it was all said and done, at the end of the day, everyone to a T said, I'm so glad we did this. Mm-hmm. Grandma and Grandpa started this business, and I didn't even understand all the things that were going on. And, they talked about the family employment policy. And there was even some discussion about that where there's some confusion. And we're like, no, this is to be inclusive, not to be exclusive. We want you to do that. And then the last little piece that I'll share was, engage. Like I said, this was a construction demolition company. So they engaged all of the children by having the uncles come up and stand up and pretend that they were either a bridge or a building. And then the kid had to determine how they were going to take down that bridge or that building. And it was, I'm Superman and I've got this superpower and I'm just going to knock it right. It was hilarious, and people were laughing and having fun. And those are the kinds of, I love what you're talking about, because it is, when you watch that transition for the first time, mm-hmm. for whether they're not, for other family members, because they are proud of that name and it's attached. Mm-hmm. So I'm getting it.
Michael, your example touches on a couple of other best practices. So one of them is establishing ground rules. So we talked about communication, right? But in that example, the family members who didn't know what to expect were freaked out about, what is this going to be, family therapy? What is it going to kumbaya? What's going to happen? So at the outset, as you start getting families together, going through a process of building together what are the ground rules is incredibly important. Arne, you may want to add to that.
No, I think that's true. It extends to the point I was just going to make to you, Pat and Michael, which is, from the standpoint of family members who are shareholders too, and from the standpoint of those who work in the business, there's also realistic, important legal questions that non-managing shareholders have related to their tax returns, right? Related to the trust. And I've sometimes seen friction between the sort of the business and the non-managing shareholder because there needs to be some regular questioning, right? Sometimes their accountants need to call the business. Not everyone may do their taxes at the same time. And if you're within the business, as I've seen talked about with many family business owners, they will see that as dragging down on sort of whether it's their accounting team, their financial team, their CFO, that suddenly they're having to shift, and they'll say, we get calls all the time from family members around tax-related issues. At the same time, of course, those shareholders have to go to the business to get those questions answered, right? And so it's really important to acknowledge that, come to that in the spirit of this is not going to be an adversarial relationship, but also let's have ground rules around when those calls happen, when you have the right to sort of come in and take time away from our sort of CFO or accounting office for your own personal taxes and needs, but also what our responsiveness will be like to you as family members who are non-managing shareholders who have important questions that can only be answered by the business.
Love it.
Michael, you also mentioned an employment policy. And that was one of the other best practices that we wanted to call out, is the incredibly important role that plays, really starting with what's our philosophy about your right to work in the business. Many families will share that they feel a best practice is to have neither an expectation or entitlement. Right? The kind of voluntariness to engage with the business, that there's an opportunity out there, but how it needs to be earned. Another part of any good employment policy is, what is the philosophy around how you prepare? There may or may not be extensive internship opportunities. Are there educational criteria? Many families will say you have to have a degree in this or that. That's not appropriate for all businesses. So really thinking through what's the appropriate preparation and how do you get that? How do we support that as a family? And then there are many components of an employment policy, but another one that we wanted to call out was the issue of how you evaluate family members, going back to Arne's description of the dual relationships that happen in families or in businesses. When you have family members who are employees, how will they be evaluated? And making that clear, in your policy, saying you'll be held to the same standards, and talking about how you'll articulate that. Or the compensation practices will be the same. The vacation practices will be the same. Clear expectations around no special privileges associated with being a family member. And, not making assumptions about those, really calling them out.